Good to see everybody here today. Let's go ahead and start out with hymn 630, America the Beautiful. Would you stand with me, please? America the Beautiful. 630. We're going to be right in this section of the hymn today.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great day to see everyone, to be in the house of the Lord, to take this opportunity to worship Him and stand together. Today is the day after the 4th. Yesterday we had that celebration, so happy 4th to everyone. But welcome today to New Beginnings. It's a great day to be in the house of the Lord, so let's go to Him in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this time to gather in your house, to be together as a church and a church family. I pray that you will bless us today and help us to know that you are with us, and help us to stand always as your people and to follow you in everything we do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Hymn 631 is our welcome hymn. Go ahead and remain standing. 631. We will sing all 4 verses of this one. You know the tune of it. Okay? You know it. Here we go. These words, though. We utter our cry that peace may prevail, that earth will survive and faith must not fail. We pray with our life for the world in our care, for people diminished by doubt and despair. We cry from the fright of our daily scene, for strength to say no to all that is mean. Designs bearing chaos, extinction of life, all energy wasted on weapons of death. Creator of life, come share out, we pray, your spirit on earth, revealing the way to leaders conferring round tables for peace, that they may from bias and guile be released. Whatever the ill or pressure we face, Lord, pardon and heal, give insight and grace to think and make peace with each heartbeat and breath. Choose Christ before Caesar and life before death. Wasn't that just chock full of stuff? You can be seated. I was trying to pay attention to the words and I forgot it was my turn. Announcements. We are having Bible school from 9 until 2 on July the 18th for ages 4 years through the 6th grade. We do have some rules about guidelines to keep everybody safe, so you should be comfortable sending your kids to be with us that day, and we hope that you do.
Bible school t-shirts, if you ordered them, are in the fellowship hall spread out with your name on them, so be sure to pick those up today. And we are going to have a family night supper on Friday, July 17th at 6 o'clock. We're going to have spaghetti, keep it simple. And you can see the decorations and see what our theme is. And if you're here and want to register your kids that night, you can. We just ask that you put your name on the list so we know how many people we're feeding that night. So if you'll just sign up on that night, for that night, even if you don't have kids in Bible school, you're welcome to come and eat spaghetti. We're going to sort of spread out then too and sit in family groups, so we'll be safe then. Does anybody else have an announcement? Does anybody have an update to the prayer list? Shane?
Kathy, I got a real good friend. I haven't seen him in years and years. Talked to his sister last night. We were all real close. She asked if we would put him on our prayer list. His name is Mike Wings. He's not any kin to John and Sharon them, I don't think. They live on up 160. But Mike has got some major health issues. He's got tumors in his, I think his liver. He'll have to test. He's got major health issues. He's gone to. There's nothing really left that they can do for him here. They say they sent him to the hospital out in Texas, the big cancer hospital, to see if they might be able to do something with him. But if you would put him on the list, Mike Wings.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you can take everything off for Angela except for the broken foot
Okay.
and add that she has a calciumized spot on her thyroid.
Yes.
It is a probably 90% plus chance that it's cancerous. She'll find out more next week, I think.
Oh dear. Anybody else? I'm pretty sure Miss Obel had surgery on her foot yesterday, and to remove the piece of metal that they found and clean out the infection. Melinda said that they would watch her for a day or two to make sure her white blood counts get back to where they need to be. So she's probably still in St. Vincent's East, but maybe coming home in a day or two. Anybody else?
Our dear Lord, we ask that you please be with our church, be with the congregation, and keep us all safe. We ask that you just be with the country, heal the country and the thinking that we have. Just keep us of one mind and keep us on the straight and narrow. We ask that you give us the wisdom in the coming elections to elect someone that will be to your liking, that will be in your way. We ask that you be with anyone in the community that needs your help. Be with the caregivers and give them strength. We ask that you bring our service people back home safe and sound. And we ask all of this in your name. Amen.
And it's July. July birthdays. If you had or will have a birthday in July, please stand up. There's two of us in here. Amelia! Yay! Are you going to be two, Amelia?
Yes.
You can be two? Yay! Miss Kathy?
Yeah, Grant's got one.
65. 65.
Not two.
Not two. Happy birthday. Anybody else? You. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. God bless you. Happy birthday to you. And we have at least one anniversary. Any more July anniversaries? Katie and Cody.
Yeah.
How many years, Cody?
9.
9 years. Wow. Almost as long as we've been at church. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary. God bless you. Happy anniversary to you. Yeah, we love to celebrate those kinds of things. We're going to do another medley. This one starts on 6:33. Mine eyes have seen the glory. Then we'll go to 6:34, My Country 'Tis of Thee. Then on 6:35, would you stand as we sing the first verse of the Star Spangled Banner? We'll do that together. Need to hear you. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed a faithful lightning of his terrible so sword. Our God, his truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. I have seen the pictures of 100 circling lamps. They have built an even altar in evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. He is coming like the glory of the morning on the wave. He is wisdom to the mighty, honor to the brave. So the world shall be his from this land. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring. My native country, thee, land of the noble free, thy name I love. I love thy rocks and rills, thy woods and temple hills. My heart with rapture thrills, thy bent above. Let music swell the breeze and ring from all the trees sweet freedom's song. Let mortal tongues awake, let all that breathe partake, let rocks their silence break, thy sound prolong. Our fathers God to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God, our King. Would you stand with me as we sing our national anthem? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last
So today we are back in Nehemiah for chapter 13, the last chapter of Nehemiah today. And I swear, since we've started recording the services and the sermons, it's every time as I'm walking up here, I'm checking, where'd my phone go? I dropped my phone somewhere. And I remember it's sitting over there. But we all kind of have, our habits in our lives and things that we do. And I don't know about any of you, but I don't know about any of you, but we probably all have, that group of friends that you hung out with when you were younger that as you've grown and matured, you don't associate with them so much anymore because it could be, the possibility they may have not been the best influence on you. Sure, they may have been fun to hang out with, but maybe it was something like they partied or they cursed or they just weren't Christian. And so they wound up, even though you may have enjoyed hanging out with them, they weren't necessarily the best influence. And I believe that as we grow, I firmly believe that people can and do change. The issue is it's extremely difficult to change. It's very difficult to develop new habits. It can take several hours and days of repetition to not just develop a new and healthy habit, but to also make it so that it becomes more natural and comes to you easy and it's something you do on a daily basis. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of discipline. The problem is it's extremely easy to change back. Sometimes you have that group of friends, you hung out with them, you've grown past them, realized they weren't the best influence, you've gone on and you go back and you change, and then suddenly you go back and you hang out with them and you spend one day and you can suddenly find yourself falling back into the same habits. I know that, as myself, this sounds like a strange thing to say, but I can be fairly easily influenced whenever I'm hanging out with people every day. I wind up picking up some of their habits, some of the vocabulary they use, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. As you hang out with people and they use certain words that you wouldn't usually use, you suddenly find yourself just saying, oh yeah, you just throw that out and then go, wait, why did I just say that? It can happen, unfortunately. And you might go on and say, I'm never going to say that again or do that. You hang out with them one time and suddenly you're falling right back into those old habits because it's there. Suddenly you feel like you get away and change, but it goes back there. It can be so easy to fall back into old ways, to fall back, and it's kind of scary sometimes. Sometimes we do truly grow and change and we won't necessarily fall back, but it does. It takes vigilance and it takes discipline. And today, that is kind of what we're looking at. We're in chapter 13. We've skipped over several chapters in Nehemiah because, I honestly thought about ending it with chapter 8 in our study of Nehemiah because chapter 8 is a great spot to end Nehemiah. They have rededicated themselves to the law. It is a note and a message of hope and worship. They're finally back in the temple. They're dedicating themselves to the law. And then the following chapters are basically reiteration. They're dedicating the wall. They do the same thing. They celebrate the Feast of Booths. They do similar things. And you also get long lists of names and what offices those people were being assigned to. Some interesting stuff there, but takes lots of study. It might be a bit dry going through it. But chapter 13, though, is a little bit different. It's kind of an interesting note, and it's the last chapter of Nehemiah, and I feel like it's an interesting passage for Nehemiah to end on. So let's look at it today. Excuse me, I've got a cough today for some reason. But on that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And in it was written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, for they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. As soon as the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. Now before this, Eliashib, the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of God, and who was related to Tobiah, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which were given by commandment to the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king, and after some time I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem, and I then discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed the chambers, and I brought back there the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. So I confronted the officials and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and Pedaiah of the Levites, and as their assistants, Hanan the son of Zakur, son of Mattaniah. For they were considered reliable, and their duty was to distribute to their brothers. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for his service. In those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah, in Jerusalem itself. Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on the city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." As soon as it began to grow dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath, and I stationed some of my servants at the gates that no load might be brought in on the Sabbath day. Then the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice, but I warned them and said to them, "Why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you." From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember this also in my favor, O my God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. In those days also I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but only the language of each people. And I confronted them, and cursed them, and beat some of them, and pulled out their hair, and I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women?" And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from them. Remember them, O my God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work, and I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good. Kind of a long chapter, I know, but as I read it, I felt like we had to kind of tackle all of it. But this is a difficult passage. Let's be honest for a moment. It's kind of one of those uncomfortable passages. It touches on some issues, you know. It's not like the comfort and strangeness that you find in like the last chapter of Judges, which when I was old enough to understand what was happening in that chapter, it still haunts my nightmares sometimes. It's also not as strange as Elisha, who called down she-bears after children made fun of him for being bald, which the back of our bulletin had a note about today. So don't make fun of bald men is the message of that passage. But there are in our Bible passages that are strange, and they sometimes have, and they're hard to read and understand, and we do see those from time to time. And this is one that deals with the issues of foreigners. It has, unfortunately, passages like this one and passages like this and one similar to it. They deal with different issues. They have, unfortunately, been used in the past to justify things like racism and slavery according to race and the Crusades. It gives a simple foreign is evil type of message. And except that's not really what's at hand. Okay, it was for Nehemiah. It boiled down to him as he saw the root of the problem that was going on in Jerusalem after he returned from Artaxerxes. It was all stemming from the non-Israelites, the non-Jewish people who had come into their midst, were leading them into problems. So he just said, simple, we're just going to throw them out, be done with it, and live our lives separate from them. For us, though, it's pretty different. If we were to apply this in that sense, none of us would be allowed to set foot in church. We're all foreigners ourselves. We are not, unless some of you are Jewish, and I'm unaware of that, we are the foreigners. We are the ones who are invited in. We also do have examples of foreign women being celebrated in the Old Testament. Ruth and Rahab are two of the biggest ones that I can immediately think of off the top of my head. There are others, but we do have those examples. We also, it does become apparent that that's not what that chapter means to us today if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. It's not encouraging us to throw out anyone different from us. Jesus has thrown open the gates of the kingdom to allow everyone in, and that is why we are allowed to gather and celebrate and join in with that kingdom. So maybe it is about things that are unchristian or worldly, except we'd be a pretty poor church if as soon as we found out someone wasn't Christian, we threw them out the doors. No, this passage is a simple and kind of forceful declaration and a commitment to holiness. Well, I say it's simple, but it's really anything but. Holiness is an interesting topic. This chapter is also strange, not only in what it covers, but it's also strange. Nehemiah is kind of different in this chapter. Doesn't he seem a little bit different than he was before? Maybe you don't see it, but before now, sure, Nehemiah has been forceful. He's known what he's there to do. We've never seen him be violent. He's called people together. He's looked for the uniting action. He consults, he plans, he considers, and then he moves forward and says, here's what you're going to do. He never really seems to threaten or use violence. He is willing to defend his people. We see that in chapter 4. We see him stand guard. He is willing to use force to defend his people. Fortunately, he never has to do that. He doesn't go out and attack the armies himself to try to drive them off. He merely makes the show of force, but that's not his go-to action. Here, though, no. He comes home, he forcefully cleanses the temple, he threatens violence against any foreigners who try to enter the city on the Sabbath. He does use violence to beat and pull the hair of the people who are marrying the foreign women, and says you should never do this, you should commit to teaching your children correctly. He is forceful. Basically, I think we see a Nehemiah who is shocked to discover at what he's come home to. I skipped those several chapters, but Nehemiah has finally got everything up and running. They've built the walls, they've dedicated the temples, they've dedicated themselves to following the law of God. We see them doing that. They've made these dedications, and even as he's leaving, they stand up and they read the laws. He brings up the story of Balaam, which is the simple story where Israel was betrayed by the Moabites, and it's why, they become the historic enemies of several of these people groups, why they are forever enemies, and probably why, we see it's those same people groups that are causing them the issues in Nehemiah and are opposing the list. But yeah, like I said, most of what is between this and chapter 8, it's reaffirmations of the dedication, lists of names. Chapter 8 is a pretty good spot to end it on. But then you have this chapter, which seems like this strange way to end Nehemiah. They read the law, Nehemiah returns to the king. He was commanded to do this all the way back in chapter 1. And he goes to the king, he serves him for a little while, and then says, hey, I need to go back and check on my people again, make sure things are running right. And what does he find upon returning? Tobiah has a guest room in the temple. And that is, in fact, Tobiah the Ammonite, the guy from chapter 2 and chapter 4, the one who was actively opposing them, the one who united the coalition of all the other people groups against Jerusalem, has a place of honor in the temple of God. That's not okay. You can kind of understand why Nehemiah's first response seems to almost be just blind anger. Get all of this out here, get in, cleanse the temple. And not only is it this guest room, it's the place where they store the tithes. They store the vessels of God. This is a very important room in the temple of God, and they've put a vowed enemy of the people into that room. It's kind of a strange thing. We also see that the chief priest has joined his family to Sanballat the Horonite. He is another one of those leaders of the coalition against Jerusalem. The Levites had not been given their portion of the tithe, and they had been driven out of the temple. The people are working and trading on the Sabbath because that's one of the days that the Tyrians come to trade. Nehemiah's reaction is kind of just, we just talked about this. You know, I emphasized this over and over before I left, and yet I come back and find that you're breaking the law. It's almost like what is wrong with you people? What is wrong? So he just throws everyone and everything not Jewish out. He just simply says, we can't handle having any kind of influence on our lives. We just have to get rid of all of it. Because the people of God are meant to be holy. The issue is, it is extremely difficult to stay holy while living in a world that is decidedly not holy. So Nehemiah is just simply taking away that issue altogether. Just says, get rid of all of it. We're going to focus on ourselves and be holy. You know, they're still allowing the Tyrians in during the week, but he says, avowedly and threatens to lay hands on them. That still does have the same meaning today that it did back then. He's about to throw down and fight people himself. And he uses his own hands on the people within his own tribe. But he is furious with them. They are a people of God that were supposed to come back and be the holy remnant. That's what the exile was all about at the end of the day. They were committing sins against God, and they had several major sins that each one of the prophets point out. Not celebrating the Sabbath, desecrating the temple, allowing foreigners to corrupt them and influence them. Pretty much the only one that we're missing here is them not celebrating the year of Jubilee, which, considering the fact that they're trading on Sabbath, means they're probably not going to celebrate that either when that pops up after about 49 years pass. So Nehemiah pretty much just looks and sees, this is exactly what we were thrown into exile for. We were supposed to be purified during the exile and return back as the holy remnant, and darn it, I'm going to make sure we do that. So he simply says, we will be holy. So, kind of our question today, and we have a few other things, but what is holiness? You know, does anyone know what holiness is? You know, holiness is kind of a strange thing. It has grown in meaning in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's kind of associated with this weird mysticality. You read almost any fantasy book, there's holy magic, which is always going to be your, you know, healing magics and purification magics and things like that. And so we've kind of ascribed to this holiness as time has gone on. It's been given this mysticality. It's considered divinity and things like that. And yes and no, not really. God is holy, and holiness is God, so you can understand where that association of holiness and divinity and mysticism starts to develop as years go by. But, you know, does that mean we as a people of God, if we're truly being holy, are we supposed to be calling down holy fire and healing people with the holiness of God? Some people actually do say yes to that, but no, holiness is a lot simpler than that. It's not really anything mystical or magical. It's not even really divinity. It is part of God. It is an aspect of Him. It is an aspect of His people, but, you know, it's different from divinity. Holiness simply means to stand apart, to be set apart. It's the word kadosh or kadesh. There's actually several different forms of the word in Hebrew, but you may know this. Hebrew words have very large ranges of meaning. They're very versatile words. They simply just didn't have as many words as we do in English, and definitely not as many words as the Greek did. The Greeks put us to shame with how many words they have. So, you know, that's why you get like 5 different levels of slave for like words for slaves and love and all those kinds of things in Greek. Whereas we only have like and love and slave and servant, you know, kind of different, but not really. But in Hebrew, you have one word that can mean 10 different things. And you're just supposed to kind of figure it out based on the context. And even then, sometimes it's still pretty unclear what it means, and they're doing that intentionally. Sometimes whenever they use the word blessing and curse are actually the same word. Cursing just tends to be a really intense blessing. So sometimes whenever you see it, he talks about how the blessing or the curse was turned into a blessing. Technically, those are both the same word. It's a pretty interesting thing. But holiness has this large range of meaning too. And so it covers several different things, and it's telling us a few different things about ourselves. It means set apart, and it does mean holy, but it means purity. It means being ritually clean, things like that. It really kind of means cleanliness, but even for the Hebrew language, it's not like cleaning, like, if you're taking a bath every day, that's holiness. Maybe some people believe that. Cleanliness is next to holiness. Some people, I think, make that association. But no, it's like ritual cleanliness. You follow the laws, you follow the rules. Again, going back to Leviticus, there's an entire section there called the Holiness Code, which is literally just this is what it means to be holy. The law and the holiness codes were set up. They separated Israel from the rest of the world. The Israelite religion was radically different from everything else around. That is something that is so shocking as you study ancient religions. They all have something similar in common. They tended to have lots of gods. Those gods did not like you. They merely tolerated your presence. You appeased them by offering them gifts. And maybe they would bless you, or maybe they just wouldn't kill you that year. Or then again, maybe they were going to kill you anyways, no matter how much you offered them. Oftentimes, we saw a tying up in the ancient cultures, we saw a tying up of religion and government. They were pushed in together. They were one and the same. Religion was nothing more than another form of dominating the people. They literally have a word for it, of the domination cult. It was an idea of dominating the people. They had to give everything they had over to the gods, or else the gods were going to kill them, which meant the priests were going to sacrifice them to the gods if they didn't offer enough money. So basically, the priests were just going to go and murder you if you didn't give enough to the gods, and said that it was the gods who caused it. So religion in that time was a very strange thing. You can study it, you can find all kinds of strange things. Each one has its differences based on different things. That was kind of an ultimate core. They called for sacrifice, often human sacrifice. They were violence, they were bloody, and the gods were never happy with you. The Israelite religion, though, starts off with Abraham. And it starts off with God approaching and coming to Abraham and essentially telling him that he loves him. And he wants the best for him. God is always looking to take care of them. He makes it very clear every step of the way he does not want human sacrifice. Yes, unfortunately, sacrifice is still a necessity, but you're not going to sacrifice humans. He wants love. He wants devotion. He wants your heart. And we see that constantly throughout the kingdom. The Israelite religion was radically different. And the laws and the holiness codes are very concerned with cleanliness and health in a lot of ways. They are very strange things. They made the people of Israel very different. Following those laws separated them from the rest of the world. It denoted them as God's people. It set them aside, it set them apart. Just by following those laws, you weren't going to look like the rest of the world to the rest of the world. And that's what all of this shows. And Nehemiah is trying very hard to make certain of that. As they're allowing in these outsiders among them, and they're not forcing the outsiders to follow the laws or the influence, or not even trying to tell them this, that, or the other thing, they're pulling away the people of Israel. They're corrupting them. They're making them unholy, making them stop following the laws. They're just kind of saying, well, maybe I don't have to celebrate the Sabbath today. I need to go, I happen to have this, I need to go make a sell. And then someone just says, I'll just start up the wine presses, so we'll have wine for the foreigners that are coming in to sell. It just kind of starts, and it corrupts them, and it pulls them away from holiness. And Nehemiah says, no, not only we're not going to dedicate ourselves to the law, we're not just going to say the words, we are going to live it. We are going to live these laws. We are going to stand apart. And holiness for us as Christians and as the people of God looks much the same. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest, we shouldn't be taking the Nehemiah course, beating up everyone that's not Christian and throwing them out of our doors. That's not what we're called to do. It's very different. But holiness is very much the same thing. It is simply living a life that is fully devoted to God. It is fully focused on Him. It is living a Christ-like life. As we talked about constantly, when you live that Christ-like life, it is very different from what the world calls you to. It will set you aside. It will denote you. Start of the Sunday school lesson today actually hit that very well on the mark, about how if you are following those laws of loving God and serving Him and loving people and living for them, devoting yourself to that, you will look very different from the world, because that's not what the world calls us to. And that is holiness. It sets us apart. Now, but we have to watch out for those corrupting influences. And it's very easy to write off, the foreign, something that is different from us, something that is other to us, something that we just don't like, as being a corrupting influence. It was very easy for Nehemiah to spot the problems and take these steps to remove it. You can pretty much see in every step of this story, there's a problem here, We see in the first one, the very first sin against the temple is that not only have they allowed an Ammonite and a Moabite into the temple, into the family of the chief priest, which that is expressly forbidden in the law. It also happened to be Tobiah and Sanballat, avowed enemies of the people. Nehemiah tries to make it very clear they are not welcome here. They're going to do nothing but cause us problems. And not only that, we see in the very next story, after he throws out Tobiah, that the Levites and the singers, the people who were there for the dedication ceremony, who were supposed to be paid for the work that they did out of the tithes that took place at that time, they had pretty much just been run off and sent home. It doesn't say this, but probably by Tobiah, the man who was living where they stored the tithes and the vessels of God. He probably just said, nah, keeping this for myself. Or the chief priest probably did that. That was one of the huge corruptions the fathers of Israel before them had done. Chief priests had taken their portion of the tithe. They had taken of the best instead of giving it to God. It was corruption. But there were enemies of the people being given positions of honor. He says this isn't good. And then they're not paying the Levites or the priests. They've been driven out and sent away. And they've been forced to go home and work their fields instead of serving at the temple where they've been appointed. He also sees them defying the Sabbath, which he does. He calls them in and confronts them. And this one, he does actually talk, and he doesn't, he doesn't threaten the nobles in this one. He is very much, why are you profaning the Sabbath? We know we are not supposed to do this. This is exactly what happened to our fathers. This was the disaster that we've just rebuilt from. Excuse me. That we've just finished rebuilding from. The Sabbath, we're not supposed to do this, but he identifies that the reason they're doing this is because of the Tyrians living among them, who are coming in and trading on the Sabbath. They're probably working on the Sabbath to say, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. I'm trading with non-Jewish people, so surely that's okay. He's yelling, no, that's not okay. So he locks them out of the city and just says, don't even stay here during the Sabbath. And eventually they do learn to respect that. They still come into the city on the days that are not the Sabbath, but they very much are not allowed on the Sabbath. He makes it clear, we will honor the Sabbath. We will keep that day holy. He also goes against those who married foreign women. And I'm not going to lie, out of all the stories, this is the one that disturbs me the most as I read this chapter, because I think he was beating up those women. Not good. But I understand why. Now, we have the examples of Ruth and Rahab. We know there are foreign women who join with the people of Israel and accept their kind of special exceptions. Nehemiah is going to understand that they are exceptions. Not only are they accepted by God and ordained by him as special, divinely planned exceptions to be allowed into the people, they did more than just marrying into the people and then just continuing. They didn't just keep living their old lives and their old religions. We see those women who are celebrated in the Bible, they truly converted. to Judaism. They adopted it. They became one with the people. They learned the language. They learned the customs. They learned to serve God because they were already serving God as best they could before they became one with the people. For these people that we see here in Nehemiah and the examples he points to, the wives of Solomon, Solomon had a lot of wives, and he did a lot of bad things for those wives. They did not convert. They are marrying the people. They are going out to the outsiders, and he just says, we're not even teaching our children the language of Judah. They're learning the people of the outsiders. They're learning their customs. It's more than just language. They're learning non-Jewish customs. They're not learning to honor God. They're not learning to worship. These women are coming in and they're not converting. They're marrying and they're raising the children in their own ways. And he simply says that's dangerous. That's going to pull us away from God far more. And that's why he is very strict on that account. He simply just says this will not be tolerated. And it is kind of a strange thing, but it's another act that he's against. And then, of course, he throws out Sanballat as well. We see him throwing these things out. He sees these problems and he identifies them as being the root cause of why they're not following the Sabbath, why the people weren't being paid, why the high priest was becoming corrupted, and why probably their children were not being raised to honor God. All tie back into the foreign influences. And so that's what he sees in almost everything and just says, we're just throwing them all out. We can't have them here. They're going to pull us away. They're going to separate us. Now for us, fortunately, we can't really do that. We can't just be throwing people out on the streets. We still have to live and interact in the world. I guess there are some Christians, the Amish. They go off and separate from the world as much as they can. And there are also hermits and examples of them, though any of us that have been following quarantine, especially those of us who live alone, know that is extremely hard. But isolation is not fun, no matter how much you try to focus on God during that time. But it is. For us, it's not just foreigners and outsiders. Again, we are the foreigners and the outsiders. We shouldn't hate anything just because it's alien to us, but we must be on the watch for those influences. We have to make sure that we're focusing on ourselves and focusing on watching ourselves and staying watchful of ourselves. I always think whenever it comes to something like this, Paul establishes when it comes to marriage, he establishes that there's kind of different levels of goodness when it comes to love and marriage. Basically, he says abstinence is the best. If you can go your whole life without marriage, that's the best. But if you can't control yourself, marriage is perfectly fine and good. It's the fact of avoiding temptation. He declares one thing is good, but if it's something that's just going to be a constant issue and a temptation for you, where it's easy to fail, it's okay. One thing is sometimes there's a different level. Sometimes it's better to just never touch it, to never do it. Sometimes, it's fine, but you got to make sure you're staying holy while doing these things. And so the major issue of this passage is how, and what's especially scary, is how easy it can be to become corrupted without even realizing it. And that's kind of where Nehemiah comes in. They've just read the law. They've just dedicated themselves once again. He leaves. He's probably gone for a while, but he returns home and just finds this litany of issues against the people. They've fallen away so far, so fast. We've probably been seeing the barrel of apples, the bushel of apples, one bad apple spoils the bunch. We've probably been seeing that phrase go around a lot lately for various reasons, but it is applicable to this. Whenever one apple rots, it essentially takes the rest with them. Any that are nearby, the chemicals that it releases cause the others to rot faster. And that's why just a few bad apples causes, I always heard the saying is one bad apple spoils a bushel of apples, but apparently it's a barrel of apples. Is what I've been seeing lately. I don't know. A group of apples, one bad apple can corrupt. It can cause the problems, and that's why you wind up having to throw them out. There is an issue. And of course, I'm probably going to convict myself and a lot of others. I don't just watch Christian TV every day. I love the Game of Thrones books, and the show was amazing for a time. Decidedly not good, wholesome Christian concept, unfortunately. But it was good. And so we sometimes have to ask ourselves, are things like TV, what we read, the video games I play, are those healthy for me? Are those good for me? There's all kinds of arguments and justifications for and against. Should I be watching some of the things that appear on TV? Should I be watching the things that are constantly streaming now? Especially nowadays, it feels like they're constantly trying to push the envelope. They've been doing that for like 60 years. But they're really doing that these days as the streaming comes out. They're really pushing the envelope. So we do have to watch ourselves. Is that something we can handle? Is that something that we can watch and expose ourselves to and not become corrupted? Or is it something that we should avoid? And I think it's something that we do each have to kind of come to our conclusion to. For Nehemiah, he essentially just says, no, I'm not giving my people the option. We're throwing them all out and being done with it. And sometimes you wish you could do that, but it's a little bit different for us. And of course, it's also one of the big things that we do see in Nehemiah, other people that he's yelling at and confronting. It's not just the foreign influences. The bad apple analogy again. There's a few people at home that are becoming corrupted, and they're causing the issue to spread. Some of the nobles are not keeping the Sabbath. They're probably forcing some of their laborers and slaves to work on the Sabbath as well, which makes the problem worse. The chief priest is the source of the corruption and the source of allowing Sanballat and Tobiah into the people. It's the people of Israel that are going out and getting these wives and not, telling them, I need you to follow our customs and to live that. They're just like, oh yeah, no, we'll get married and then you can just do whatever you want. There are also those issues. And so we must stay vigilant. Unfortunately, as Christians, we don't have that option to remove ourselves from the world. Not completely. We have to, on some level, interact with the world around us. We don't really have that option to just throw everything out, be done with it. We are to separate. We are to stand apart. We are to focus on being holy, but we still have to interact with the world around us. Now, certain things we should avoid, and we should look for, and we should watch for, but the most important thing in all of this is focusing on staying vigilant of ourselves. Staying vigilant of what are we doing, what are we allowing, is that something good, is that something bad, is that something tolerable, or something that should be avoided in all circumstances. It is strange times that we live in. There's all kinds of things, and as nice as it would be sometimes, just declare yourself a hermit or to go out and live in a commune and focus exclusively on living your life according to the Word of God and holiness. Those are good. I think there are examples of those that can be done well. But even monks that do separate from the world and live most of their lives apart, most of them have philosophies or doctrines that involve coming back into the world to take care of the poor, to feed. At some level, at some point, as Christians, we have to interact with the world. We can't just throw out any un-Christian influence and be done with it. We have to face it. We have to live in the world that we currently live in. Nehemiah saw the problems, and he just said, no, we're going to focus on ourselves. Because although we have those foreign women who are shown as the exceptions, they are very much the exceptions. They are very much God-appointed exceptions who make that stance. Majority of the precedents shows they don't tend to do that. They tend to become more of an issue. That's exactly what happens here. And Nehemiah basically just says, for now, we're going to focus on ourselves. We're going to focus on being holy. Those are his final reforms, the final things that he leaves the people of Jerusalem with, that no matter what, we will stand apart and holy, focus on following the law. And so, we have to make that commitment ourselves. And we have to try to live according to the Word of God in all things. To try to live it out. To try to put out the best we can. And unfortunately, as we interact with the world, we're going to come into those corrupting influences, those problems, those issues, those things that we see around us in everything. It's there. Some things that aren't Christian. And it will stain us. It will stick to us. It'll affect us. But that's why we stay vigilant of ourselves and why we have a church family. while we stay vigilant of each other and hold each other accountable. We do everything we can to live according to the law of God, and we focus and question ourselves and say, is this okay? Is this messing with me? And if it is messing with you, get it out of your life. That can be hard to do sometimes, especially when it's something you love, but it is something we have to do. And if we live truly according to that word of God, we are going to be looked at strangely. We're going to come across as weird. We're going to come across as different because we're dedicated wholly and utterly to following God and staying true to his word. Holiness, we always see it as a good thing, and it is. It is the best thing to strive for. When someone truly lives that holy life, they look weird to the rest of the world. Because that's what it means to stand apart. It means to be different, to not look like the others. And it's the challenge of holiness, what makes it difficult. It's also what makes it worth it. Because that is what we are called to be. We're called to live that example. We may be looked at strangely, we may be mocked, but we must serve God and do the right thing in all things with every ounce of our being. So let us go to God in prayer today. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this time to study your word, to study the example of Nehemiah. I pray that you will be with us, you will bless us, you will help us to focus on you and to live according to your word as we interact with the world around us, to stay devoted to you no matter what it takes. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And for our time of invitation today, I do just want to say, we do live according to that word. We need to focus on staying God and reflecting, staying true to God, staying true to his people, united as one. And so we reflect on that, on what maybe is in our lives that could be interfering with our faith, focusing on how we can do that better.
3:16, would you stand?